The topic will be is neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is defined as the view that people with neurological abnormalities should be treated socially the same as people with differences in physical capabilities, gender, race, or sexuality. Our group will be looking at both sides of this view in relation to the autism community. The neurodiversity side of the debate will discuss the ethical obligations of viewing the strengths of people with autism when seeking employment, educational opportunities, as well as aspects of daily living. The summarizer researcher for this side of the debate will be Jackson. The opposing side of this debate will discuss the dilemmas with the neurodiversity approach. They will look at economic costs, cognitive abilities of people with autism to be successful in the workforce, and the amount of people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, currently employed, specifically in the field of science. The summarizer researcher for this side of the debate will be Abby. Jackson?
All right. So when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're talking about people's ability to advocate for themselves and self-label. Who the main people are that kind of drive this movement are individuals who are formerly diagnosed with Asperger's and now currently diagnosed with high functioning autism spectrum disorder. But basically, what they're trying to say is that they're trying to avoid the negative connotations of having a cognitive disorder and the negative ramifications and social impact of having such a label and such a diagnosis. And what they're really advocating for is the ability to self-advocate, self-identify, and self-determine uh, their own future. So there's a couple of ways to look at this argument. From a ethics standpoint, the argument could be made that ethics in general are not based on science. They're a system of behavior based on the moral code, um, uh, uh, public perception, or morality based on good and evil, right and wrong. And these kinds of views aren't necessarily based on scientific fact, and therefore can have various interpretations. Um, Most times, in a good and ethical system that's relatively good in design, will have scientific fact and scientific function kind of guide those principles, but they're not a necessity. If we're going to use the ethical argument, we have to look at some of the two main ethical constructs when it comes to operating a large society. So that's the deontological argument and the utilitarian argument. So the deontological argument is the argument based on the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And what this is saying is that majority rules, that whichever group has the most numbers should have the most say. They are the majority. Now the positive and negative kind of viewpoints that we can take from a neurodiverse standpoint is that if you were to apply that system, well, those with cognitive disabilities are in the minority, and so you are negating their ability to advocate and have self determination by saying that your opinions don't really matter. The the larger community at whole has agreed upon, giving you this diagnosis, and that's what you have to live with. On Even from a specific community like the autism spectrum disorder community, the neurodiverse is a small minority of that community, and a lot of people are afraid that by branching out, by kind of pushing this self identity um, agenda, that you are going to limit the ability of the ASD community as a whole, to move forward. And one example that is often given is the ice bucket challenge, if you remember from a few years ago. So the video that I would like to share kind of, it's just a celebrity, you know, compilation of celebrities undergoing the ice bucket challenge is Bradley Cooper and whatever. But basically, what that illustrates is that by having a movement that itself that identifies, and by accepting public help, that you can get amazing gains. So, this challenge, some of the rough numbers, I think on the first year was $115 million in donations. At the end of, I think, the 2 year span, it was closer to $250 million. So this is like massive amounts of funding, massive amounts of attention that was given, and it could be an argument for the need, to kind of have these labeling things. Um, on the positive side of, and that's for the positive side of a deontological ethical argument against the neurodiverse. The deontological argument for neurodiversity would be to say that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, but those few are still dependent upon the society and are still integrated within your society. And if you do not recognize their rights and their needs, and they have to live a substandard life, or they have to live in conditions that aren't conducive to happiness, that you actually that community, that smaller minority, actually influences the larger majority in a much bigger way than would be anticipated. One of the interesting you know areas that people like to point out is the relationship between other comorbid issues with associated with cognitive disorders like anxiety, depression, suicide, but also unemployment rates and incarceration rates among those with cognitive disabilities. So some of these statistics are kind of alarming, that you see the vast majority of those with ASD do not uh, find gainful employment. And if you were looking at a society as a whole, you can understand that some of these ramifications would, it's incurred costs on taxpayers, it's incurred costs on assisted living infrastructure, it's incurred costs on, the healthcare system. So by not allowing these people to live like happy and fulfilled lives, you are actually harming you're actually doing the exact opposite of what you're doing. You're trying to protect the majority by kind of isolating the minority, but in doing so you're hurting the majority. So that's the deontological argument for and against. The utilitarian argument, which is the argument that individual rights need to be respected above all else, can also go both ways. On one hand, we're looking about for advocacy. We're talking about letting the individual express themselves and identify themselves, because that is a part of who they are, and that is their right as a human being. That is their right. And this goes into directly with the BACB code of ethics 2.05, that we have to recognize the rights and the prerogatives of our clients, that is built into our system. And by kind of presenting forced choice or illusions of choice, or by these kinds of negative stereotyping and um, diagnoses, and that have a negative social perception, we're not honoring that these ethical codes. We are not honoring the rights of the individual. And as we just said with the deontological argument, if the individual feels whole and complete, then they are better able to contribute to the society as a whole. Now the opposite argument, that could be made, is that if we respect the rights of everyone, and everyone has their own identity and their own right to call themselves and label themselves whatever they wish, that sometimes inevitably will come into conflict. And is that conflict worth the ability for individuals to express themselves? And for the neurodiverse community, we say yes, it is. If you look at past social movements or past kind of issues that had to deal with self-advocacy, self-determination and identity issues. You can look at civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s. The same-sex marriages rights of our of the more current years, and of course our current times with gender identity. We are allowing these individuals to identify and advocate for themselves and determine their own future. Two people getting married, it's no other business than those two individuals. How a person identifies themselves is no other body's business but my own. If I want to call myself neurodiverse, if I want to avoid the negative stereotypes associated with cognitive disorders, that's my prerogative. I am the one that is living with those circumstances. I am the one living in that situation. And if you are not, then you have no right to comment on those things. Yeah, it's you don't have the credentials. So that's kind of the ethical argument, for the neurodiverse. But I'm interested to hear what my opposition has to say.
Thank you, Jackson. Um, so for the opposing side of neurodiversity, we're looking at how treatments interventions for individuals, specifically with autism, can actually increase their autonomy and kind of give them that goal that neurodiversity had in mind of wanting them to be individuals and have their own thoughts and be able to advocate for themselves. We're going to first specifically look at ABA. This is a research field that shows early intervention with people with autism, how it can improve scores in expressive language, verbal language, daily living skills, and adaptive behavior. And this is all shown in different types of research articles, which we'll show at the end. But specifically with ABA, because this is such a large field for people with autism and kind of a huge area of treatment for them, this needs to be looked at as far as ethically, is this okay to kind of impose on clients, especially if they're not able to advocate for themselves, give them these treatments, change their behaviors. Is this ethically okay? And our side of the argument would say yes, it is, because these treatments such as ABA can further improve the quality of life and autonomy, thus increasing the success of the individual. So from an ethical standpoint, we want clients to be successful. We want them to have those functional communication skills, and ABA is a way for that to happen. Without services, they might not ever be able to advocate for themselves or be able to say how they feel, what they want. So we were not going to be able to even determine what they're wanting to do or what their preferences are. Where the neurodiversity argument, that's what they want them to be able to do. Well, without these services, they might not ever have that chance. So one of the things that my side argument like to show is a video of a child who had autism or has autism and received ABA services. It kind of shows where he started before he had the services, where he was not as able to communicate, and kind of his progression as he was receiving treatments. In the beginning of the video, it's assumed, it's not stated there, that he doesn't have the communication skills to advocate for himself. So it was not his choice for treatment. It was his parents, I'm assuming, because he's a young child. But kind of showing, is this ethically okay? Because we're going to show the visual, and then you all can kind of decide for yourselves on that. Let me pull it up. Not wanting to work. Right. 1 second, we'll try this another way. Okay, so if the video doesn't post, we can just provide the link for anyone watching to see it for themselves. But basically, it just shows how a child with autism can go from not be able to say words or even echo common words, not replying to their name, and things like that, to being able to verbalize their thoughts and verbalize what they want to do, or different preferences on things. And it kind of shows his progress after a few years in ABA and how that can increase his autonomy. So we'll just link that for everyone to see outside the video. The sound quality probably isn't going to be the greatest anyway, so that way you can watch it on yourself and kind of on your own time and see just his progress. There's lots of other videos that you could find on YouTube or other places that kind of show just actual stories of people who have experienced treatment and been able to advocate for themselves afterwards. So kind of along the same lines of ABA, ACC, which is alternative and augmented equipment, is used in several ABA services, and it's used to help people communicate more functionally. So it can be used as like an iPad or things like electronic, helping those individuals be able to speak if they can't verbally say what they want and need. One study that we found showed that this improves the social function of behaviors for that individual as well as opportunities. So if they're able to communicate and function socially more and be able to communicate more effectively, then they're going to automatically be given more opportunities. They're going to be able to do more in an education setting, maybe be in more generalized classrooms, or they might be able to have more employment opportunities. So these treatments, even if the child can't advocate for themselves yet, these treatments can give them the ability to do that and then give them opportunities they might had not even been able to ask for in the first place. They didn't know existed, or they'd be able to do that. One of the ethics code that we'd like to bring up is 1.01, which is the reliance on scientific knowledge. This is from the BACB. Behavior analysts rely on professionally derived knowledge based on science and behavior analysis when making scientific or professional judgments. So if there is scientific knowledge and it's shown in these articles and through different studies that like ACC or ABA is like strong for promoting those communication skills and for giving them those tools that they have the right to be able to communicate and do, then we need to be able to, as behavior analysts, give them those opportunities. We should not deny them those when we know this is the best scientific evidence, this is the best treatment for them, even if their parents might see something on Facebook or see something as an article they read somewhere that's not like a peer-reviewed article, something like their grandma sent them. It's the VA's job to be able to advocate for the client in a way where they can express that, hey, like we know this practice is the best and will give you the best results, and kind of explain that to them so they know they're making the best decisions for themselves. Because without that knowledge and without that experience, they're not going to really be able to make the best decision if they don't have that experience. So outside of ABA, we've already discussed how ABA and other treatments like ABA can give people with autism more autonomy with their daily lives. Outside of that, my side wants to talk about just how even neurotypical community has to still conform to be successful. This is not something that's just specific with people with disabilities or with people who have autism. It's kind of something that has to happen for success, and success in life can look different for everybody. But for our argument, we're talking about being independent, reaching goals, being able to have a job, have education if those are things they want. But independence, you kind of definitely need to be able to communicate and be able to have some sort of employment or some sort of setup where you're able to provide for yourself. And conforming is necessary for that. So even in like schools, for example, where they have dress codes, sometimes those dress codes aren't what you would typically wear, but they're necessary to be able to prepare for a work environment where you might have a dress code or a uniform that needs to be worn for either just the purpose of the job itself or for just conformity of knowing who's an employee, or just for whatever reason that that company has. You have to be able to conform to that. Or the hours that you work, that you can't always choose what hours you work, or coworker interactions. Just because you're angry at a coworker or don't care for that person, there are certain things you have to do that's socially acceptable in order to keep your job. You can't just scream at them in the cafeteria or the office. You have to be able to communicate functionally with them, and people without any neurological disorders have to learn this and do this. And our side would like to make the point that it would be ethically wrong to deny people who might struggle more in these areas, such as people with autism, the skills and the training to be able to have those same opportunities. It's not correct for them to not be able to have these opportunities just because they don't have the skill set to communicate functionally. Um, the other side, so Jackson talked about some issues with unemployment rates in people with autism. And um, our side of the argument would like to talk about those deficits as well, because there is a deficit in the unemployment rate. But a study showed that deficits in communication have been found to be the number one reason for high unemployment rates. So that issue and barrier is the communication skills, and these individuals are not going to get communication skills unless they get treatment. They're not just going to occur one day. So, along with creating a supportive work environment, research suggests that training and communication skills can benefit these individuals to make them more successful in the workforce. So, simply changing the view of the employer and coworkers is not going to suffice in this area. They're not going to give them communication skills to be able to actually perform their work duties. So, the neurodiversity side kind of states it's more of like everyone has to get over the fact that people are different, and we have to accept them for who they are and let them be who they are. But sometimes if they have deficits in certain areas where they're not able to be in the workforce and are able to hold a certain job, just because their communication skills, is that ethically okay to not allow them that opportunity, even though they could be capable of doing the job, they just don't have the communication necessary to advocate for themselves or to be able to complete all tasks of the job. Even with a device or with some type of treatment, they would be able to do that. Another ethics code from the BACB that we would like to talk about is that clients have the right to effective treatment. And that's all based on research literature and adapted to the individual clients. So we always have the obligation to advocate for and educate the client, which I kind of talked about earlier, about scientifically supported, most effective treatment procedures. So even though the client might have an idea of what they want or what treatment they think is best for them, it's really the BA's job to inform them on the most effective treatment, because that is their area of expertise. And even if the client doesn't know the outcome right then, kind of showing them what could work and how it could get them to a better spot than what they had thought before.
All right. Thank you. I'll begin asking a question to Jackson first. The first question will be Jackson. Are you there?
What was the first question?
I couldn't hear it. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. Considering your view that people who have neurological differences should be allowed their individuality and not be forced to conform for treatment purposes, how would your side suggest people who engage in self-injurious behaviors or the aggression towards others best be supported?
Well, those are two very different topics. They're related, but they're a little bit different. So when it comes to conformity, I think we all understand that when you take part in a larger, group or society, that there's a level of conformity that you have to, take into consideration. Like, like what Abby said. Like, I'm not arguing against what she was saying earlier. If you want to participate in a Judeo-Christian religion, you kind of have to believe in God or be open to the interpretation of a God. If you don't, believe in that kind of stuff, then maybe that's not the right group for you. So, um, I recognize the level of conformity that needs to be taken into place, but with that in mind, when it comes to physical aggression, once you impose yourself on another human being, you're no longer acting as an individual. You're no longer your own self. You are now part of a relationship, in positive or negative relationship. Um, with certain other kinds of neurological disorders like schizophrenia, uh, antisocial disorders, there is a biological component to the processes in their brain that provide them with a proclivity towards violence, and sometimes that hurts others. And while we may kind of not necessarily excuse but understand the motivations behind such behaviors, we don't excuse them from those behaviors. They're still held accountable, whether it is they're not allowed to have free access to the greater community, with imprisonment or uh, enrollment in a mental health institution. We understand that once you impose your physical self onto someone, especially your physical self onto someone, that your rights as an individual kind of get diluted because you're no longer operating as one. You're not operating within a relationship. So that's one issue, and we kind of agree, with the non-neurodiverse argument with that. When it comes to sibbing, it's a little bit different, or self-interest behaviors. The reason for that is there's multiple processes going on when it comes to self-interest behaviors, and uh, to be honest, the scientific community doesn't fully understand it. ASD is called a spectrum for a reason. There's a wide variety of manifestations of this disorder, and the results are that we cannot get a consensus on many of the facets of autism spectrum disorder. One of them is uh, sibbing behavior. One aspect is the sensory perception. Is there a miscommunication with how you are perceiving the world around you? The second is is your brain processing those perceptions, that sensory input? Is there some kind of function or dysfunction going on with that cognitive processes? And the third is, how do those things influence the manifestation of the sibbing behavior? When it comes to the first, with sensory input, it's hard to say what's being done definitively. Does the person who exhibits sibbing behavior actually feel pain? Is there a miswiring? Do they instead feel pleasure? If these kinds of things are possible, then who are we to say that they cannot do or not do to unto themselves what they wish? We don't stop um, an alcoholic from drinking unless they're going to drive. We don't tell people who have health issues to not eat that brownie. Maybe in a social you know perspective, but not necessarily in a controlling perspective where, hey, if that person wants to eat that extra donut, they can eat that extra donut. Like they're their own person. Same thing with sipping. We're not completely sure about the sensory process. On top of that, we're not 100% sure on the processes of understanding what that sensory input is. And because of that, we cannot make these determinations about how to treat these individuals. You don't know what's going on. You're assuming a negative because of the social perception of hitting yourself. But there's also other human reflexes that kind of exhibit this. The major one is itching and scratching. When you get an itch, you scratch. It is one of the strongest human reflexes, in existence, as it's one of the only ones that causes us to do self harm. And yet, if you have an itch and you tell someone not to scratch that itch, it's cruel and unusual punishment. You are telling someone to forcibly choose to go against a natural instinct, a natural reflex, and that's not okay. It's listed as a form of torture. So the same thing could be said with sibbing for the neurodiverse, is that because we don't understand all the processes in place, it is almost irresponsible to label them as negative and to kind of force our own public perception about what is acceptable, what is not acceptable onto these individuals. And that's kind of where I see where the neurodiverse kind of lands within those two kinds of behaviors.
Okay. And Abby, I have a different question for you. What would your side say about a person who was recommended treatments but refused to accept the treatment? For instance, like if this person engaged in self harm or aggression towards others, is it ethically okay for someone to refuse that treatment?
That's a great question. So, with my side of the argument, we would definitely say that in any form of self harm or harming others, that there's an ethical dilemma if they're refusing treatment, because the most important thing is the safety of the clients and other people. So if the safety is being compromised, then there needs to be some type of intervention. For example, where it comes into like safety holds and things like that, there has to be a strict policy and guidelines and training in that. But if the safety is being compromised, those are things that sometimes have to happen. So when it comes to self-injurious behavior, where it's something like a headbang or something where it could cause a concussion, the definitely something needs to be done in order to prevent that individual from being injured. So that could be a temporary solution, as in having like a pad or something soft, like a mat, where the person would not be hurting themselves as badly. Or it could be an actual behavior plan to prevent those from the future. But definitely, our side of the argument would say that it is crucial that there is some type of intervention. And if the person is refusing that intervention, then it's still ethically okay to try to help them as best as possible. So you can't force someone into behavior intervention, but you can provide things like the mats or different types of proactive strategies, or just reactive strategies with the mats to prevent injury, because it's not ethically okay to allow someone to injure themselves. As far as like the stimming and things that aren't as harmful, I think what would have to be looked at is, are these stimming or self-stimulus behaviors, are they hindering the client's ability to functionally live in society? Like, is it stopping them from being able to go to the store or go to school? And if these stimming things were brought down, so if their occurrences of the stimming were decreased, would they be able to do things like go to school in a different setting or be able to have a job? And I think those things have to be looked at before choices made, but I don't think the answer should automatically be no. They just need to decide for themselves. I think a lot of things need to be looked at, but our side would definitely say that there could be ethical guidelines, that like an ethical stance in stepping into those situations, even if the client isn't advocating for them, to better their lives and their opportunities.
Okay. And now, this question is both of you, but Jackson, and Jackson, what do you expect or would like to see in the future of ABA in regard to treatment or neurodiversity?
Is as far as ABA treatment and neurodiversity, what do I think the future holds? Well, um, let me just be clear that we don't, as a the neurodiverse, we don't oppose ABA. We don't oppose to, not necessarily opposed to treatment and helping and advocating for those with autism spectrum disorder, or any other kind of neurological disorder, or with that want to improve themselves behaviorally. We're not opposed to that. That's like saying you're opposed to someone who has health issues into exercising or encouraging a better diet. We're not opposed to it. What we're opposed to is the forced choice and the lack of recognition of the individual, and the lack of the individual to determine their own future. As far as the future with ABA, I think it looks good. ABA will continue to advance research, and the science will continue to advance. The thing that I'm worried about is the continuation of this forced choice. Is what I would like to see is more options given to those who are neurodiverse, because ultimately, that's all we want. ABA can exist. ABA can be over there, and if you are neurodiverse and you choose to, seek help and you choose to undergo treatment or have aid, that is your choice, and that should be made available to you. And we're not opposed to that, But on the opposite side, the opposite choice must be made available. If you want to advocate for yourself, then you say, look, I don't want to participate either in this society or in this community or in this group, or I don't want to participate in this treatment or this, intervention, then that's also your choice. And that choice should be respected. But we're talking at the very edge of the spectrum. Ideally, what all we were looking for is the ability to identify who we are. We're the ones that are neurodiverse. We're the ones that have these circumstances. And the problem with the ABA system is, or with the healthcare system in general, is that you require a label in order to get services. You require a label, a diagnosis code, so the insurance companies can get paid, so the insurance companies know who and what is allotted for who and what. And that's where I think we come into a problem, is that in order for us to even have the option of treatment, we have to label ourselves with these things. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's ethical. And I think that, if we both are to exist, in a general balanced state, that you have to recognize both. We already recognize that ABA, is a behavioral treatment, but the other community, the rest of the community at large, needs to recognize that we should have more say, that we should be able to identify, to label ourselves, and to choose our own treatments. And I think that would be the ideal future, is just allowing that more choices.
Okay, thanks. Abby, how would you
Um,
answer?
yeah, I think that ABA and neurodiversity should come together. I don't think it should be two separate things. I think that we can look at it from both perspectives. I think what's really important for this to come together is that behavior analysts continue to uphold the ethical concerns when making treatment plans. So it's never a treatment plan just to make them more like somebody else or more like the rest of society, but it's always to improve their quality of life and to improve their ability to functionally communicate and advocate for themselves. So in the future, if like they're taught through treatment plans to be able to communicate like no or communicate yes for certain things, then they'll be able to kind of make more choices within their treatment plan. So I think like what Jackson was talking about is more choices, is that the more successful they are in different treatments and the better job the BA is doing in making sure these treatments are effective and scientifically based and directed towards the individual client, the more choices the client will have. And I think that's kind of where those two lines overcross.
Okay, thank you.
And so does anyone have anything else to add?
No, I think you and I are in, kind of in agreement. We might, like I said, it's not black and white. It's kind of shades of gray, and the majority of our thinking processes are aligned. It's just kind of trying to define or clarify that gray area. But I respect your opinion, and I think this conversation went well.
Great. So, oh my goodness, what just happened? So if can you guys see the references now?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. I figured out how to do it again. So, we're going to end our conversation here then. Once I show our references really quickly, then unless anyone has anything else to say, thanks for watching this debate and this discussion on just ethics and different things that come up in ABA and in treatments. I think it was a good discussion. I enjoyed it.
All right. Bye, guys.
Yeah.
Bye.